Okay, boys and girls, before we move on to the next part of the presentation for lesson 2-1, there's one thing that I forgot to mention. I'm actually going back to something I asked you to put into your notes earlier and revisiting this to show you one more important thing. When we look at the whole numbers and the decimal places, there's one thing that wasn't mentioned, and that's the fact that the decimal places and the whole number places are symmetrical around the ones place. So here's the ones place and the decimal. To the left of the ones place is tens, to the right is the tenths. So other than the fact that tens has the th on it, those words go together. 10 and 10 is what they both begin with. Moving to the left one more place, and to the right one more place, we have hundreds and hundredths. So those two places go together. Thousands and thousandths, they both begin with the word thousand. So all of the places moving to the left one place and to the right one place, they are symmetrical, meaning they're the same as you move outward in either direction from the ones place. Okay, so now moving on to the second part of this presentation, I'd like you to think about 1/10. There's a few questions here that I just want you to consider and think about in your mind before we proceed to the next slide. The first question is, what do you already know about fraction and decimal relationships? Hopefully you have some answers to that question because we did address that a little bit in the first part of the presentation. What does 1/10 mean? How can it be written? Think about these questions before moving on to the next slide. Just go ahead and hit the pause button for a second and see if you can get some answers to these questions in your mind. Feel free to talk to your neighbor about these questions if it is an appropriate time for talking. So coming back to 1/10. 1/10 means 1 of 10 equal parts. It can be written in a couple of different ways. It can be written as 0.1 or decimal notation, or 1 out of 10, 1/10 in fraction notation. You should always be sure to include the 0 before the decimal point when there are no whole numbers. If it's not there, sometimes we miss the decimal, which completely changes the number we're dealing with. The 0 also reminds us that the number is less than 1 but greater than 0. More about the 0. The leading 0, or the 0, also helps the decimal numbers look more like their equivalent fraction numbers. For example, when we have the decimal 1/10, it looks like 0.1. Its fraction notation is 1 out of 10. The denominator in the fraction says 10. If we read the decimal notation backwards, it would also read 1, 0, or 10. The next decimal we have here is 1/100th, 0.01. When we include the leading 0 read backwards, it reads 100, which is its equivalent fraction denominator, 1/100th, 100. Same thing when we include the 0 in the number 1,000th. Read backwards, it's 1,000, which is the denominator of its equivalent fraction, 1/100th, 1,000. So to sum up, always use the leading 0 when there are no whole numbers. The next part is one of the learning targets of lesson 2-1, and that's how to correctly read a decimal number. The first thing is to read the whole number, if any, how you normally would. Step 2 is say and, not point, when you get to the decimal. And then number 3, read the decimal part of the number how you normally would, but then state the place that the last digit lands in. Special note, if there are no whole numbers, begin with the third step. While some people do say 0 and then the decimal portion, it's really not necessary to do that. Right now, please pause the presentation and copy this page into your notebook, reading a decimal number with steps 1, 2, 3, and the special note. Resume the presentation when you have finished copying those notes. Let's practice reading some decimal numbers. I'm going to read it incorrectly first, and then we'll go ahead and read it correctly following the 3 steps that you just put into your notebook. Have your notebook right next to you so that you can try and read the decimal numbers correctly before I say the answers. The first one looks like 0.32. Step 1 is to read the decimal number, read the whole number if there is any. This is a 0, so we don't have to read the whole number, and we don't have to say and for the decimal point. We'd start with step 3. Step 3 says, say the decimal number how you normally would, 32, but then state the place that the last digit sits in. 2 is in the tenths, hundredths place. So to read this correctly, we would say 32 hundredths. The next decimal number also has a 0 instead of an actual whole number, so we can go right to step 3. Read the number, the decimal number, how you normally would, but state the place that the last digit sits in. 987, and the 7 is sitting in the thousandths place, so this number is read 987 thousandths. This row on the bottom now includes some whole numbers. So all you have to do is read the whole number like you normally would and say and when you get to the decimal point. This number is read as 3 and 24 hundredths because the last digit 4 sits in the hundredths place. You can see that it's going to be really important for you to memorize the places in our decimal place system. Until then, though, you should have your place value chart out in your notebook to help you read these numbers correctly. The next number has a whole number of 9, so we would say 9 and 6, because 6 is just 6, 9 and 6 hundredths. The 6 is sitting in the hundredths place. 210 and 689 thousandths, because the 9 is sitting in the thousandths place. Last but not least, we have the number 3,210 and 8 tenths. As a challenge, can you go back and tell which 2 whole numbers these decimal numbers fall between? Remember, between means bigger than the whole number you see, but smaller than the whole number that follows it. So for the first 2, the whole number that you see is 0. The next number that comes after 0 and when you're counting is 1. So these 2 decimals on the top are both between the whole numbers 0 and 1. On the bottom, however, we would take each of these numbers individually. The whole number that you see for the first decimal is 3. So it would be between 3 and the next number after 3 when you're counting is 4. This decimal, 3 and 24 hundredths, is between 3 and 4. How about 9 and 6 hundredths? First, look at the whole number you see. Think about the number that comes after it when counting. Did you say that 9 and 6 hundredths is between 9 and 10? If you did, good job. You got that one correct. If not, let's try this one. Remember, look at the whole number, which are the numbers to the left of the decimal, and then ask yourself what number comes after that whole number. Did you say that 210 and 689 thousandths is between 210 and 211? If so, good job, you got that one right. The last one, 3,210 and 8 tenths. Look at the whole number. Ask yourself what number comes after that whole number. Those are the 2 whole numbers that this decimal is between. I hope you said that this decimal is between 3,210 and 3,211. If you're still having trouble, don't worry. There is a video that you'll see later on in this lesson that will help you explain this a little bit further.